Everything is configured. The rules are committed, the version is pinned, and every engineer finally gets the same behavior. And this is the week Priya stops trusting the desk because the answers got good enough to stop reading carefully. A ticket comes back with a fluent, confident paragraph quoting a returns policy that the company has never had. Nothing crashed, no error, no warning. It reads like the best answer on the page, and it's invented. And the prompt did ask it not to. The instruction was right there, politely worded, and the model went around it. Freeze, because that sentence is the whole episode. Asking is not the same as making sure. Here is how the exam asks it. A developer needs every response to start with one specific structure. Adding instructions to the prompt works most of the time, but not always. What should the developer do? The item parks in the corner, and every move in this episode sits somewhere between asking for that structure and guaranteeing it. Call it 2 more of your 53, small on the blueprint, and it decides whether everything else you build produces answers worth shipping. Before any technique, let's look at what you are actually sending. Because a prompt isn't a sentence, it's a request with places in it. There is a system field for the standing instructions, the ones that are true on every single call. There's room for examples, room for whatever document you are working on, and the actual ask. And there's the assistant's own turn, the reply, which turns out to matter more than you'd think. Now, the line that everything in this episode sits on, and I want you holding it before the first technique. At one end, you are asking the model for something, at the other, you've made it structurally impossible to get anything else. Priya's prompt was way down at the asking end, politely worded, easy to ignore. Every move from here slides that marker, and the exam is almost always asking which end an option is at. Start at the asking end because it's still where most bad output comes from, and it's the cheapest thing to fix. Most of it traces back to a prompt that assumes something the model was never told. The docs give you a test, and it's the most useful sentence in the whole prompting guide. Show your prompt to a colleague who knows nothing about the task. If they'd be confused, so is the model. That's the check, not clever wording. Would a competent stranger know exactly what to do? And for Priya's invented policy, there's a documented move that's almost embarrassing in how simple it is. Give the model permission to not know. A prompt that says, say you don't know rather than guessing gets far fewer confident inventions because the alternative to answering stops being failure. Tighten it by making it quote the passage it used. An answer that has to cite its source is much harder to invent. That's real and it's free. But look where the marker still is. You are asking nicely, and a good prompt can still be ignored. So stop describing what you want and show it, which is the single most reliable way to steer format. The exam calls this few shot prompting, meaning a handful of worked examples sitting inside the prompt itself. Two things it tests: use several rather than one, and make them genuinely different from each other. Wrap each one in its own label tag, the angle bracket kind the docs use, so your examples can't blur into your instructions. 3 examples covering 3 different shapes of ticket teach more than 10 near identical ones. This moves the marker, and you can feel why. You've stopped explaining the shape and started demonstrating it. Here is the part almost nobody checks, and it's pure exam points. The same words perform differently depending on which slot they sit in. Who the model is being goes in the system field, the standing instruction from the last episode. What changes per request goes in the user turn. So the role and the house rules sit up top, and today's ticket sits in the message. Mixing those two is a common mistake. The second one is counterintuitive enough to be a favorite. When you are sending something long, put the long thing near the top and your question at the end. Documents first, then what you want done with them. That's the opposite of how most people draft a prompt, and one of your slots isn't in the prompt at all. A tool's description is an instruction, and it's the biggest lever on whether that tool gets used correctly. So it's part of your prompt whether you think of it that way or not. Everything so far though is still a request. placed well, demonstrated well, still a request. Now the other end of the line, and it starts with the trick everyone still recommends. Remember the assistant's own turn. For years you could start the reply yourself and the model would continue from where you left it. Put an open brace there and you'd get your structure every time because the sentence was already begun. On current models, that's gone. Not discouraged, not deprecated with a warning. The request is refused. Older models still take it. From the current generation onward it errors, and it's decided by which model you call, not by anything you switched on. So the same code that worked last year fails now purely because you moved forward. The documented replacements are two things you already met, and they are not equally strong. A schema constrains the output, so the shape is guaranteed. That's the top of the rail. A system instruction asks for the shape, which is plenty when most of the time is plenty. It sits lower and the exam knows exactly where. That gap between them is the whole episode in one picture, and it's what the question in the corner is really testing. One thing left, and it's what separates the exam's view of prompting from the internet's. The docs don't treat a prompt as something you write, they treat it as something you measure. State what good looks like, build a way to test it, then refine against that test. Which means the answer to the prompt isn't reliable is rarely a cleverer sentence. It's a way to tell whether the next version is better. If one option offers to measure and another offers to reword, the exam wants the one that measures, and when one prompt is carrying too much, the named move is chaining, which just means splitting the work across separate calls. Draft, then review that draft against your criteria, then refine, separate calls so you can inspect each step instead of guessing. Back to the format question at full size, and now you are armed. Option 1, prefill the start of the assistant's reply so it must continue in that structure. Option 2, use structured output with a schema that defines the required shape. Option 3, move to a larger model which will follow the instruction more reliably. Option 4, reword the instruction more firmly and repeat it at the end of the prompt. The invented policy and this broken format are the same failure in different clouds. You ask with words where you needed a mechanism. Name the decision first. This is what Claude sees and says. Then read the constraint. Every response is the constraint and works most of the time, but not always is a tell that they don't have it. So rule 2 is live and guidance loses to mechanism. Prefill dies on the documented fact you just learned. On current models, the request is refused outright, so this option describes something that no longer exists. And notice it's the most experienced sounding answer on the board. That's exactly why it's there. The bigger model dies on rule 1. It's the generic upgrade. It addresses no named constraint and more reliably is still not always. Rewarding more firmly is a corpse already. The stem told you instructions work most of the time, and the cold open showed you a polite instruction being ignored. It's the lower of the two replacements sitting right down at the asking end, and this stem asked for every response. What survives is the schema. It's the only option that makes the shape a constraint on the output rather than a request in the text. Here is what the invented policy taught you, and it's still one sentence. Asking is not the same as making sure. Be explicit enough that a stranger could follow it and give the model permission to say it doesn't know. Show examples instead of describing the shape, each in its own label tag, and make them different from each other. Role in the system field. Long documents at the top with the ask last, and a tool description is an instruction too. Prefill is refused on current models. A schema guarantees where an instruction only asks, and you find out which by measuring. The counter moves to 27 of 53, which puts you past halfway on a course where the second half is where the marks concentrate. Tomorrow, a customer conversation runs 40 messages long, and somewhere in the middle the desk forgets the refund it already promised.